President Biden has just done the most terrible thing. I mean, he's basically broken Afghanistan almost overnight. But it then seemed to me particularly cruel to then watch diplomats, and it's not just in the US, it's in the UK and elsewhere, making these very vague statements about how we now call on the Taliban to respect women's rights, and we will make sure as the international community we hold them to their commitments. Of course, this is all completely empty language. I mean, how exactly is anybody supposed to hold them to their commitments if we've just handed the whole country to them? By leaving, it seems as though the US and its allies are saying, we don't really care about those things. We don't care enough to lose even one soldier trying to protect these things. We don't care that we've spent $1 trillion over 20 years.
Welcome to today's discussion. My name is Dino Patijalal, founder and chairman of Foreign Policy Community of Indonesia, the largest foreign policy group in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia. You know, this month has been, there's a lot going on this month, but one big international development is Afghanistan. I think the political developments there has caught many of us by surprise. Kabul has fallen to the Taliban much sooner than people expected. And the US forces and allied forces have withdrawn from Afghanistan, and a lot of questions about what this means for the political future of Afghanistan, for South Asia. Even Southeast Asians are asking, what does this mean to our region? So there are a lot of questions unanswered and still remains to be seen. And we are very fortunate today to have Rory Stewart, who will share with us his understanding of events in Afghanistan. You know, Rory is a British person and one of the most interesting people that I have ever met. You know, he was a diplomat. He quit diplomacy and he walked 6,000 miles from, I think, Turkey to India, Nepal, Pakistan, and then Afghanistan at the height of the war. Yes, walk, yeah, not take the bus, not take motorcycle. He walked for, I think, about 3 years or so. And then he moved to Afghanistan afterwards. He started the Turqua Foundation there. He taught at Harvard University at the John F. Kennedy School of Government. He became a minister for international development in the British government. He wrote a book, best-selling book, which is called Places in Between. A wonderful book, I've read it. And he also taught at Yale University, and he also ran for the office of Prime Minister and lost to Prime Minister Boris Johnson now. You know, overall, it's a really one in a million guy, Rory. It's really, really nice to see you, and thanks for sharing your time with us, with friends in Indonesia. How are you, Rory?
Well, it's a great pleasure, and it's wonderful. And Dino and I have been friends for a very long time. I started my career as the second section of the British Embassy in Jakarta, so it's wonderful to come back again. I'm just feeling guilty about the fact that after 25 years of dealing with Afghanistan and Iraq, and that I'm so out of touch with Indonesia, but it's wonderful to reconnect with you and to see you running such a wonderful organization.
Yes, thank you. And sorry, I forget to mention that you were in Iraq, deputy governor at a province there, and then you were awarded the British Order Empire medal. Sorry if I messed it up.
Got the medals. Got the medals.
Yeah.
Not as many medals as you, Dino.
No. Well, but I think I need to ask you this, Rory. You walked 6,000 miles for 3 years, avoided cars and bikes and motorcycles and buses in the most dangerous place in the world at the time, which included Afghanistan. You know, so seriously, why did you do that? You know, people said, "Are you mad?" Yeah.
Well, I think the answer, is that I feel very strongly, and you must have felt this as a diplomat yourself, that you can often get stuck inside embassy compounds living in a city, and that if you really want to understand countries, particularly a country like Afghanistan, you have to get into the rural areas. When I entered Afghanistan at the end of 2001, there were only about 300,000 people living in the capital city. And it was a country of 20,000 villages. And to really understand its life and its future, it was incredibly important to spend time in village houses. I remember at the end of the walk, so I was walking for nearly 2 years, and I finally did the final 600 miles across Afghanistan. And I'd been staying every night in a different village house. I think I stayed in 500 village houses on the way. And I got to Kabul and I returned to a diplomatic meeting with President Karzai, with Ashraf Ghani, who was then the central bank governor, with Kofi Annan. And there was this document that we were all passed around saying every Afghan believes in a gender-sensitive, multi-ethnic, centralized state based on democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And I could see so clearly that this language made no sense to any village in which I'd stayed. I couldn't even think in Dari how I would translate that into language that somebody could understand. And I think from that realization about the surreal gap between the way that the international community speaks and the reality on the ground, many of the problems in Iraq, Afghanistan, but also many of the problems around the world in international development come out of that. And maybe that's something we can explore a bit more. But certainly that's one of the things that walking did for me.
Yeah, well, I saw one of your tweet recently where you were responding to a comment by US White House spokesperson. And she said that the Taliban, it's for the Taliban to determine what kind of role they want in the world. And you said that was somewhat naive. Yeah. Can you elaborate why?
President Biden has just done the most terrible thing. I mean, he's basically broken Afghanistan almost overnight. Afghanistan was still a very fragile, poor country, but it was much better at the beginning of this year than it was 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so it's been an extraordinary transformation. I mean, I said when I first saw Kabul, there were only 300, 400,000 people in the city. It's now a city of 4 or 5 million people. And many, many Afghans in Kabul and in the cities were beginning to live the kinds of middle-class lives that people live in Indonesia. Mobile phone use went from 0 to 90%. Everyone was on Facebook. Many, many more people going to universities springing up, schools springing up, a middle class springing up, businesses springing up. It really was a huge transformation. So then he broke it. He broke it basically because very recklessly and apparently not caring at all about the interests of the Afghan people, the air support and the command and control was removed almost overnight. And the Afghan army, of course, collapsed. We can talk a little bit more about why that happened. But it then seemed to me particularly cruel to then watch diplomats, and it's not just in the US, it's in the UK and elsewhere, making these very vague statements about how we now call on the Taliban to respect women's rights, and we will make sure as the international community we hold them to their commitments. Of course, this is all completely empty language. I mean, how exactly is anybody supposed to hold them to their commitments if we've just handed the whole country to them? So I think it really, this question of language is very important. And it goes through the whole process. If we had been better over the last 20 or 30 years about being more realistic, showing more humility when we talk about other people's countries, for example, by saying things like, we hope over 20 years to make Afghanistan a little bit more prosperous, a little bit more stable, a little bit more humane than it was 20 years ago. We want Afghanistan over 20 years to look a bit more like Pakistan, a little bit less like the Congo. These are realistic things to say. But of course, nobody says that. They try to pretend they can turn it into Switzerland. They try to pretend they're going to be able to create this sort of dream state. And this language, I think, is very dangerous.
Yeah. From what you said, are you saying that some degree of nation building in Afghanistan was actually working? Because certainly Biden was saying that he's not interested in that aspect of Afghanistan. But is that what seems to be happening? That some nation building is actually happening?
Yeah, of course, there had been huge advances over 20 years. I mean, it was still a very fragile, poor country, but it was starting from an incredibly low base. And these things take a very long time. This is why the US and its allies should show strategic patience. So let's take South Korea. One of the problems with President Biden's analysis is he believes that we have to leave. We can't stay. How long are we going to stay? The truth is, of course, that the United States is still in South Korea 70 years after they initially went there. They're still keeping 25,000 soldiers in South Korea. There were only 2,500 soldiers, American soldiers in Afghanistan at the beginning of this year. So 10 times as many in South Korea. And not just for 20 years, for 70 years. Now, what does that mean? 20 years after the US first got involved in South Korea, so in the mid-1960s, the GDP per capita of South Korea was lower than the Congo. It's a very, very poor country still. And it was a military dictatorship. But the US did not say after 20 years, okay, this is all a waste of time, we're leaving. But they stayed. Now, of course, 70 years later, South Korea is one of the richest countries on earth. But it still would be dangerous to take US troops out. I mean, nobody thinks it's a smart idea to suddenly take 25,000 American troops out of South Korea. Now, President Biden's logic would suggest, well, look, if the South Korean state can't survive without US troops, the whole thing's a waste of time. It's not sustainable. How long are we going to stay? We're going to leave, right? But if you are able, as we were in Afghanistan, to keep some degree of peace and stability with 0 British casualties since 2014, no American soldiers killed since February 2020, and even before that, very, very few since 2014. This was a light, affordable presence, which was doing an enormous amount of good. And it's very, very strange that the politics of the world makes people feel we have to leave, when in fact it was costing surprisingly little for the international community to stay.
Yeah. Do you think there is a contradiction? On the one hand, the American and Western foreign policy calls on the emphasis on values, freedom, democracy, human rights. But in Afghanistan, they're undertaking a strategic pullback that would lead, in the eyes of many, to the downturn of these values in Afghanistan: freedom, human rights, and democracy. Yeah.
Yes, and of course it's very sad because, in a sense, from a humanitarian point of view, from a peacekeeping point of view, those troops were as important as UN peacekeepers in many, many parts of Africa. Right? And we support that normally. We support the idea that there should be some presence in DRC and Somalia, South Sudan, to prevent things getting worse. It's not necessary that it's going to make things better, but at least to prevent things getting worse. And since the end of the Cold War, the US and its allies have tried to say that they have a vision of a better world, that they do believe in human rights, that they do believe in democracy, they do believe particularly in Afghanistan and trying to give opportunities to women. And we were protecting that and defending that. By leaving, it seems as though the US and its allies are saying, we don't really care about those things. We don't care enough to lose even one soldier trying to protect these things. We don't care that we've spent $1 trillion over 20 years. It reminds me, unfortunately, a little bit of, I have a 4-year-old, and he will start trying to build a piece of Lego. But if it's not perfect for him, he smashes it on the ground, runs out of the room and says, forget it. And I fear this is happening to the West. They had a dream that they could turn Afghanistan into a perfect state. They got frustrated because, of course, it's not perfect. It was slow. It was getting better, but very slowly. And rather than stick with it and keep trying, they just smash the whole thing on the ground and walk away.